So we are now recording on computer, so we can basically start whenever you are ready.
Okay. Let's start it with understanding more the term conspiracy theory. So I would like you to outline the term, which are the basic elements of it and stuff like that.
Okay, so my definition of conspiracy theory is basically the standard definition you find in the philosophical literature now, which is that a conspiracy theory is any explanation of an event which cites a conspiracy as a salient cause. So this is a perfectly general definition, which is non-pejorative, so it doesn't have any aspect that says these beliefs are automatically false or unlikely to be true, and it applies to any explanation of an event which a conspiracy is responsible for, which of course means an awful lot hinges on exactly how we define what counts as a conspiracy, and thus that then tells you what can be the proper subjects of a conspiracy theory.
Okay, so you had this book published, The Philosophy of Conspiracy Theories, and there you write that there are those kind of scholars who have this prejudice against conspiracy theories. So my question is, are conspiracy theories necessarily wrong, in your opinion?
Yeah, so in my philosophical view, no. So there are kind of three attitudes you find towards conspiracy theory in the academic literature. There's a hard core of theorists who go, look, the term conspiracy theory simply refers to a theory which is not true. So anything which is labelled as a conspiracy theory is prima facie irrational because it cannot be true. The problem with that particular view is lots of theories have been labelled as conspiracy theories in the past and then turned out to be true to believe nonetheless.
Yep.
So it's kind of implausible to claim conspiracy theories by definition can't be true. Although I believe in German it's kind of built into the term. If you refer to something as a conspiracy theory, you're referring to an obviously false theory. But at least in English, that isn't necessarily the case. So the other school of thought, aside from the philosophers, is that, well, conspiracy theories can be true because we know conspiracies occur, but most conspiracy theories are false. And because most conspiracy theories are false, you have a prima facie reason to be suspicious of anything which has been labelled as a conspiracy theory. And this is kind of a dominant view in social psychology. It's not particularly popular in sociology. Some people in cultural studies think it's a good theory, some people don't. But philosophers like myself tend to side with the other view, we might say the other end of the spectrum, which is a conspiracy theory is just an explanation of an event that cites a conspiracy. If you can show there is a conspiracy, then obviously the conspiracy theory is the kind of thing you ought to believe. So let's follow the evidence and try to work out which of these conspiracy theories we ought to believe and which ones we're entitled to go after investigation. No, that's not true.
Okay, let's talk about typologies. I have some favorite ones from Barkun or from Jesse Walker, but if you could outline some of them which are closer to you, for instance.
Well, yeah, so Barkun's typology, which kind of talks about conspiracies, super conspiracies, and the like, is kind of doing what you might a kind of typology of size, which is linked to plausibility. So there is this kind of view that the bigger a conspiracy theory is, and that bigness can be in its ultimate goal or the number of people involved, that tells you something about the plausibility of that particular conspiracy theory. Now, I do think there's something to talking about the size of a conspiracy, because I do think that once we start talking about how conspiracies work, certain levels of complexity and the like make it harder to understand how a conspiracy can be successful. The only problem with that kind of typology is it does tend to ignore time. Not every conspiracy needs to keep itself secret forever. Sometimes you might have a wildly complex conspiracy, but you only need to achieve something in the next few days. So yes, it's going to come out eventually because there are too many people who could leak information. But as long as you achieve your end rather quickly, it doesn't really matter who finds out. This is not quite the right example to use, but a nice example of a conspiracy which only needed to be kept secret for a short amount of time was the assassination of Julius Caesar back in Republican Rome. Because, yes, you had to get a whole bunch of senators to agree to assassinate Caesar and not tell Caesar about that. And there was always a possibility some of those senators might, at the last minute, go, I'm not entirely sure I want to go through with this. But as soon as the act is done within a few days, it doesn't matter who leaks the information because, surprise, surprise, Caesar's already dead, and it's quite obvious he was killed by a conspiracy. So you kind of want to reveal it anyway. So yeah, there are kind of typologies that work along that particular way of looking at size and implausibility. And as I say, I do think there is something to it, but I think they often do ignore that actually complex plots don't necessarily have to be kept secret forever. And also they do, I mean, this is a notion that's put forward by the physicist David Robert Grimes, who's written on conspiracy theories. He published a paper in PLOS ONE. And he says, look, the bigger the conspiracy, the more implausible the conspiracy is going to be. So size just equals implausibility. But what Grimes fails to note is that actually you can talk about conspiracies which appear big, say like NASA faking the moon landing, but actually you can still think of that conspiracy theory as being relatively small by talking about the fact that there's only a hard core of conspirators who ever actually know what's going on. And there's a whole lot of patsies or dupes who are involved in it without ever actually knowing the extent of it. And of course, these examples in politics are rife. If you look at the way the KGB operated in the Soviet Union, or the Stasi operated in Germany before unification, the way that you maintained your political conspiracies was by making sure that civil servants did not know the extent of your plans, because if you control how much information they have, it makes it really hard for anyone to work out exactly what you're up to, especially in organizations where you have to conspire against the people who are conspiring against you because you need to have access to the boardroom, the chairman, the leader, etc., etc.
Okay, let's start the discussion second part, which is the most interesting maybe, the relation between the pandemic and the conspiracy theories. So again, which ones are your favorite? Because now we have so many to choose from.
So I've actually spent the last week diving through COVID-19 conspiracy theories because I've put forward a grant proposal for a study of COVID-19 conspiracy theories in Australia. So I've spent far too much time reading about the various views. And when I went into it, I thought the one I was most intrigued by was the 5G conspiracy theory, the claim that COVID-19 is not a real illness at all. It's a byproduct of the 5G cellular signal being rolled out worldwide because 5G weakens the immune system, which either means that typical illnesses we normally shrug off become quite deadly, or literally coronavirus is simply how bodies react to the 5G signal being in the atmosphere. And this has led to, in places like the UK, people burning down cell towers to stop 5G signals from being spread, often ending up burning down non-5G cell towers used by emergency services, which actually is making the virus spread for the sheer fact that people can't get to patients fast enough. But now I'm really intrigued by the link between the anti-vaccination conspiracy theories and COVID-19. Because you've got two issues here, one of which is anti-vaxxers, and I'm going to put it out there, I think anti-vaccination conspiracy theories are fairly implausible. are using the pandemic as a look, they're going to force us to get vaccinations. So this is simply, there's no real illness here, or we're panicking about nothing. The state is simply using this crisis to force us to inject our children with toxins and poisons. But the side effect of that is, in places like Australia and places like the US, where proponents of anti-vaccination conspiracy theories are somewhere between 20 to 30% of the population, according to most polls, that is sufficient to mean that you're not going to get herd immunity for a lot of illnesses. And COVID-19, which at this stage seems to produce very little immune response in humans as far as we can tell. So we're going to be very reliant on a vaccine if we want to actually go back to living normal lives, will require a huge uptake of the vaccine. And anti-vaxxers who believe COVID-19 is a manufactured crisis may be the reason why our lockdowns are not going to end in the short term at all.
Okay. I would like to mention one favorite. I was writing an essay about Captain Ashtar's channeled messages, and there was this conspiracy theory that the whole pandemic is about stopping these light bearers, or what is their name, these enlightened persons, people who would like to transform to be in the fourth dimension or something like that, and then to go to the fifth one, some kind of spiritual stuff. But this pandemic is exactly to stop them in this process. I don't know if you heard about it, but this was one which I really liked.
I haven't heard of that particular conspiracy theory, but yes, it does fit in with a lot of what I will call New Age conspiracy theories or alternative medical conspiracy theories, which are talking about the way in which the technological world is basically impeding our own natural evolution. So the idea that left to our own devices, we'd become truly spiritual beings. It's technology and the state which is impeding that. And you'll get these crises like COVID-19 designed to keep us in the material world, to stop us from accessing some kind of spiritual paradise. I mean, that's the kind of view that David Icke, the British footballer turned alien shape-shifting reptile advocate. Advocate's the wrong word. That sounds like he's promoting the cause of alien shape-shifting reptiles, the enemy of the alien shape-shifting reptiles. He's also about that kind of, if we just get the good vibrations, everything's going to be fine.
Yeah. I had this idea, and I sent to you the question, so you probably saw it, that it seems that this pandemic is a kind of empty signifier, so everyone can fill it up with its interpretations. What do you think of that? I mean, when I was reading conspiracy theories about COVID-19, it seems that there's nothing really new here. Or how do you think about that?
No, I agree. I think at this stage, as people like to point out, we're actually really only at the beginning or the end of the beginning of this pandemic crisis. So it's going to be going on for a long time. But at the moment, all of the conspiracy theories we're seeing about COVID-19 are basically old conspiracy theories using COVID-19 as a kind of excuse to bring those up again. So the 5G conspiracy theories have been going on for quite some time. COVID-19 is simply a, look, we can now point to an event in the world which is post 5G. Ipso facto, 5G must be the cause of it, which I was having a chat with the US political scientist Joe Usinski earlier today, and he was talking about his research into these things. And apparently at the beginning of the 20th century, there are a whole bunch of unnatural ice theorists in the US. So these were people who really thought the advent of refrigerators and the idea you could make ice in your home was going to bring about the end of civilization, because ice made in a fridge is unnatural and it's going to cause bodily harm. And I just joked, it is interesting though. World War II happens after the invention of refrigerated ice. So technically, that technical innovation of making ice in the home did lead to the dropping of bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which just goes to show you can always backdate an issue based upon something new. But oh look, COVID-19, that must be due to 5G. It's a very post facto kind of reasoning. And I think most of the conspiracy theories we're seeing are exactly that. They are examples of people taking existing concerns they have and using the crisis of the moment to then air those concerns to what is presumably a bigger audience.
Yeah. By the way, are there people, do you know about people who believe in this refrigerator conspiracy theory today? Or we could say that there are people who, I mean, there are theories which will just fade away in time.
Yes, as far as I know, no one is concerned about making ice in their fridge today. Although, who knows? I mean, maybe someone will go, actually, no, I've got a grandparent who believes these things. I mean, I had a great uncle who was very concerned about the way that kettles worked. So if he ever boiled water in an electric jug, he always had to remove the top of the jug from it, because apparently the steam would do something dangerous to the water if it was contained. And that appeared to be a belief that was relatively common amongst people of his age and class back in the day, and does not appear to be an issue that's alive today at all. But then again, there might be someone living in a small town just outside of Washington, D.C. who goes, no, that's absolutely true. And also, don't freeze water. It's the devil's work.
As you saw, I prepared questions about is there a cure for masses to believe in conspiracy theories? But I'm often thinking about, is this a relevant question, or is this the right question? Can we talk about conspiracy theories as some sicknesses or some pathologies of the world, and which we have to cure somehow? Or are there conspiracy theories which are okay to believe or to have in masses? I mean, if you think of how harmful is the reptilian conspiracy theory compared to the anti-vaxxers conspiracy theories, for instance?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because there do seem to be certain conspiracy theories which they're only annoying in the sense of you can't believe that people believe weird things. So people who believe that alien shape-shifting reptiles really control the world don't seem to be involved in any kind of bad behavior that you then have to go, we need to try and control or censor that. They just appear to believe things which you think, that's stupid, but lots of people believe stupid things. I mean, most of us turn out to believe something stupid that we've never examined properly. But then you get the conspiracy theories, say, associated with white nationalism, which leads to people engaging in domestic terror attacks, or, as we saw in my country, a attack on a mosque where over 50 people died. And those conspiracy theories, the belief in them seems to be related to very, very bad behaviors, and the kind of thing that we go, no, we don't want those behaviors, and also we don't want to foster those kind of beliefs in the polis. And it is an interesting question as to how do we distinguish between the banal and the destructive, and can we react to them in such a way that we aren't just crushing the idea of theorizing about conspiracies? Because in the end, we know that conspiracies occur, and it's particularly in democratic societies, we should be worried about conspiracies going on at the highest levels of government, because that's not how representative democracies are meant to work. So we should be guarding against those at all times. So we don't want to stop people theorizing about conspiracies, but we do want people to theorize about conspiracies in a socially responsible way. And that seems to be the really difficult issue.
What do you think about banning? Some years ago, Alex Jones was banned from all of the mainstream platforms. And I usually visit his website, and he's, alive and well, and he has even a video channel called Band or something like that, and he's doing great. Probably not so many people follow him, I don't know, but still.
No, I mean, apparently the advertising for his Infowars.com and PrisonPlanet.com platforms has diminished significantly after not being allowed on YouTube and the like. So it does seem that deplatforming him has had some effect on his revenue. But no, it's not as if by removing him from particular social media platforms, Alex Jones has gone away. And I think that's in part because there is going to be a hard core of people who subscribe to the Alex Jones worldview and want information about what Alex Jones believes and what Alex Jones does. And so in that particular aspect, they're never going to disappear. But yes, it does seem... I don't know that banning works per se, although that being said, after the Christchurch attacks, my country had a very big open discussion about exactly how we deal with the trial of the terrorist, to the point where most government officials and most media outlets said, one thing we're not going to do is ever say his name. We'll refer to him as the Christchurch terrorist or the Christchurch shooter, but we won't refer to his actual name. We don't really want that name to go down in history. I mean, it will do in some respect because he's going through the court system, so there will be legal records about it. There'll be a legal judgment. He will go to prison, and he'll, have a prison number and a name. But as a culture, we've gone, no, we don't want his name to... We don't want his name to be something that people recognize, so we're just not going to say it. And that, as a societal response, I think is appropriate, because that wasn't something that was, say, a government edict saying never use this person's name. It was society going, no, actually, we just don't want to say it. It's kind of like the Lord Voldemort issue in the Harry Potter universe.
Okay, what do you think about this issue of Russian, usually it's about the Russian propaganda and conspiracy theories? There are some opinions which we say that we should ban Russia Today and Sputnik News and stuff like that, or to tackle the issue on Twitter. There are many bots which are spreading these messages. But my personal problem with this is that even if we do this, something is wrong with our democracies, and maybe this is why the Russian propaganda can work. And conspiracy theories are always related to the paranoia, which is related to not believing the establishment. So I have doubt about, is this a good idea to ban? Now I'm talking about Russian propaganda, especially. Not about some weird people who believe in, reptilians and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, this is a particularly tricky issue, because we kind of know that Russia engages in disinformation campaigns in policies overseas. So we know that they design their news broadcasts to elicit particular responses. It's quite interesting looking at Russia Today, because Russia Today, of course, broadcasts in Russia, but also has its own version which broadcasts in the US. So they produce programs which have American hosts. And if you actually watch the American version of Russia Today, on one level it looks fairly standard, and then on another level you get something really weird, which is all the advertising that happens between shows, which appears to be Russian military propaganda about what's going on in the Ukraine and the like. And there is something interesting about, if you've got a channel which is deliberately propagandistic and you suspect is producing disinformation all the time, on one level you probably would go, well, that doesn't seem like a sincere broadcaster. They're not actually engaging in producing news and doing proper editorials and opinion pieces. They're pushing a political line, and normally we look askance at that. But of course, part of the problem with any of the discussion we have about Russia today or Russia as a disinformation campaign is that, of course, the other side is engaged in propaganda and disinformation about Russia as well. And so you end up going, I mean, some of it's definitely true, and some of it actually might be the American response towards Russia or the British response towards Russia, which is also engaging in disinformation and propaganda about what the other side is doing. And thus you're going, where are these edicts about potentially banning this information actually coming from? Because if we start banning things for political agendas, then we're doing exactly the kind of thing that Russia is warning the West is doing to us in the first place, which becomes a kind of weird self-fulfilling prophecy. Which is why, ideally, what you want are incredibly diverse media landscapes, which are able to exploit or show when disinformation is being produced by the other side. But of course, then the problem becomes we now live in an increasing age of political polarization where people don't want to go and find a news outlet or a channel which shows views which don't fit their own particular agenda. They want the news channel that tells them what they already believe, which means actually the problem isn't propaganda per se. The problem is political polarization and the fact that we don't seem to want to have the diversity which would act against disinformation or propaganda campaigns.
But you talk about this era as there is something new compared to earlier decades. Is there a real difference between today and, let's say, 30, 40 years ago? Related, you mentioned that we don't want to listen to a TV channel or whatever which has a different opinion. But wasn't this like that 40 years ago?
That's a very good question, because yes, the immediate response is I'm being naive by thinking that it's a new problem that hasn't existed for quite some time. And there is something to that. I mean, political polarization has been with us as long as we've had two or more party systems within representative democracies. So it's always, and even outside of representative democracies, as long as you have an opposition, you've got some degree of political polarization going on in your government, which means you're going to have associated media, which is going to be pro the government or anti the government, and people tend to read the newspapers that support their political views. Arguably, and I'm using arguably here in that horrible academic sense of I might be completely false about this, but I'm going to assert it anyway, arguably the problem, to a certain extent, is that advertisers and the people who run media networks have become a lot better at targeting their information towards their particular core. And in part, that's a result of the way that the media works now. So media is driven on advertising. The advertising is falling out of, say, online media, so you're getting more desperate ways to try and keep people subscribed to your particular channel, to make sure that your diminished advertising revenue is being bolstered by having as many page views or people looking at things. And arguably that is the reason why you have a lot more in the way of slightly dubious reporting. So the uptick in anonymous sources that are never named, saying, we have a source inside the White House who's claiming that blah. And in the old days, it would be much harder to go to a front page with an anonymous source. Now it's much easier for that anonymous source to be the sole source of a particular story. So I think there has been some change in the news media, but it might not be as drastic as maybe I originally made it out to look.
Okay. One question regarding this. Do you think that this is the era of the post-truth? Because this is now a very common thing to say, but I'm not too sure that this is, there is a real change.
So I gave a talk on fake news at the University of Waikato 1 week before we went into our 4-week lockdown. And as part of that talk, I have an editorial cartoon about fake news from 1882. where you've got a newspaper which has fake news printed on it and a person carrying it through the street. So no, I don't think we're living in an age of post-truth. I think all of these issues have been with us since the advent of the news media, and indeed they've been with us since the advent of people telling stories to one another. I think there's an awful lot of money to be made. I'm using money here in a kind of generic sense, prestige, fame, the like, to say that the modern age is a lot worse than the old age, which I may well have just contributed to by talking about increased political polarization in the modern age. But no, all these issues with truth are very long-standing issues. They come up time and time again in the 20th century and the 19th century. We're simply seeing it through a new lens, which is a truly global media system. In the old days, when you had issues about news reporting in the UK between the right-wing newspapers and left-wing newspapers, those stories didn't leave the UK. They were debated about by people in the UK because people weren't either reading those newspapers overseas, or they were reading the digest versions sent to New York or sent to Bucharest or sent to Paris and the like. Now, of course, I get up every morning and I look at the Guardian before I even look at my local newspaper online. So we're just aware of what the media landscape looks like worldwide, which makes the issue look a lot larger than it is, even though actually it's still pretty much the same as it ever was.
Okay, I would close it with a more general question about, just 1 second, I had it here. Yeah. So do you think that the belief in conspiracy theories is necessarily attached to one's education and political beliefs, or even worse, the IQ and stuff like that? Because we can read many papers on this. That I think one of my favorite ones was that people who believe in conspiracy theories tend to have their guns at them when they go out on the street. I don't know what to do with these approaches.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not particularly convinced by. Actually, I'll reframe that. I am skeptical about a lot of the social psychology work about the correlates of belief in conspiracy theories. And there are two rationales behind this. The first rationale is if you actually start looking at the surveys they do to elicit the data about the correlates of belief in conspiracy theory, some of these studies have not been replicated, so they feed into the ongoing replication crisis in psychology. And B, they tend to be surveys done of graduate students at the university of the researcher in very small sample sizes. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean the results they're getting are bad, but it does mean there are worries about the way the results may be skewed towards particular demographics or populations. So that's one particular concern I have. The other concern is it really seems to depend on the conspiracy theory. So I was chatting with a friend earlier today about Jeffrey Epstein conspiracy theories, and there are an awful lot of journalists in the US who you normally wouldn't think to be at kind of the lower socioeconomic end, and you certainly wouldn't typically think as being of low intelligence or lacking a faculty to reason, who do treat the Jeffrey Epstein was killed by the deep state theory with some degree of seriousness. Now, this doesn't mean they necessarily believe it. They might simply be entertaining it because the story about Epstein's death is so bizarre and so unusual. It's almost impossible to believe that the official story can be correct. And I think that speaks to another issue we have when we're judging belief in conspiracy theories. Not everyone who claims to believe a conspiracy theory necessarily thinks it's absolutely true. Sometimes we espouse conspiracy theories because we think the official theory is just dubious enough that we think, well, it might be some other thing, but don't hold me to it. I'm simply saying it's a possibility. I'm not saying it has to absolutely be true. And I think some of the survey data which questions belief in conspiracy theories tends to ignore the fact that actually not everyone is strongly committed to their conspiracy theories. They might only be committed to entertaining the possibility that that conspiracy theory should be treated seriously.
Okay, well, thank you for the dialogue. And looking back at it, it seems that we didn't talk too much about the connection between conspiracy theories and the pandemic, but that's not a problem at all. I don't know.
No,
I would
no.
like to, I would like to ask anyone who's here. I have to do this trick with my, yeah. If anyone has any questions, then now's the chance to put it.
And make sure if you are going to ask questions, make sure that your mic is on, because otherwise you could be going, I'm asking a question and we're not ignoring you. It just means that we actually can't hear you.
Yeah.
Yes? Yeah.
Yeah, so you mentioned we were both talking about this thing with Russia Today and Mint Press News and all these things, but is it? But Attila already knows this, that I research a lot of stuff about China, and now that the pandemic being linked to China, it's almost the same thing. Although I think it has been a bit overboard, and the main enemy, Attila always says that it's a kind of new Cold War, and the enemy just changed from Russia to China. So these are specific examples, but could it be said that it is a general functioning of this kind of media to always seek out certain enemies?
Yeah, so I was, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, go on. So it's just it's a geopolitical issue, right?
Yeah. So I think it is one of those things where often media narratives want there to be an enemy or an other to be able to point the blame at, or at least actually if it's not the media, often it's the politicians who want to be able to go, X is responsible for the current crisis we're in. So I think we're seeing that quite deliberately with Trump's presidency in the US. Trump wants to find someone else to blame for his mishandling of the COVID-19 crisis in the US. So what better thing to do than to intimate that actually the real problem is not that COVID-19 is a result of bat-to-human transmission through mutation, but possibly that the Chinese were experimenting with COVID-19 or coronaviruses in a lab, and that thing has been released. And it's a very convenient way to tell a story, which then gives you a framing device for your particular tale of woe and how everyone is against you. And that then, of course, actually then leads to conspiracy theories about this. And Joe Usinski, the political scientist from Miami, kind of talks about this with respect to what he calls the conspiracy theories are for losers hypothesis. And this is the hypothesis that people who are on the losing end of a political battle tend to be the ones who come up with conspiracy theories to explain why they are the political losers. And what's so fascinating about the Trump presidency is that even though Trump won the presidency and still has control of one of the houses in the US, he has always acted as if the presidency was stolen from him at the last minute. So the focus on Hillary Clinton taking those emails and stopping him, or Barack Obama working against him. And so China is simply the most recent, this is an external threat to my presidency because they don't want me, your glorious leader, to be in charge. And that allows him, even in a position of power, to engage in conspiracy theorizing about an outside overpowering other. Yeah.
I'd like to ask something else, if I may. Have you read any conspiracy theories regarding in the last few days regarding Kim Jong-un's health?
Yes, it's been a bit of a hot topic here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. We're all quite fascinated as to whether Kim Jong-un is dead, whether he's in a vegetative state, or whether he'll do the thing he's done in the past, which is disappear for a month and then reappear, and North Korea says nothing about it whatsoever. There's a lot of rumors circulating, and because I mean, as we are a Pacific nation, we have quite close ties with China and Japan and South Korea, so we're quite interested in what goes on in that particular part of our part of the world. And yes, the North Korean regime is a entirely conspiratorial regime because they're very much about control of information and making sure the public only know things when they're meant to know, which means that if Kim Jong-un is dead, they're probably managing a transition to work out which family member is going to be the successor, or whether they'll go with Kim Jong-un's right-hand man, who isn't a member of the Il-sung dynasty, as to whether he'll take the reins. Or potentially, if he's in a vegetative state, the committee will be going, do we even need to appoint a leader? Because if he's not actually dead, then we can rule on his behalf, and that might actually bring a lot of stability to the country because we're no longer being controlled by the whims of a dictator whose mind changes all the time. And so we're theorizing in a vacuum and coming up with all sorts of conspiracy theories to explain what appears at the moment to be just one bit of evidence. No one knows where Kim Jong-un is at this particular point in time.
Thanks.
Okay, if anyone else wants to have a question, then now's the time.
And remember, you do need to turn your mics on if you are going to ask questions.
Oh, yeah. Or otherwise, let's close this, and then if you recorded it, then we will publish it somewhere.
Yeah. Well, as soon as the Zoom call ends, it then generates a video file. So once the file is made, I'll send you a link, and you can do with it as you please.
Okay, thank you for the chat.
Quite all right, an absolute pleasure.
Thank you from my part too. Bye bye.
Bye bye.